this was a mechanical retirement that they'd not had for what he said was a record 60 races at McLaren. This was the longest they had gone in the team's history without such a failure.
Lewis Hamilton reveals shock at his hardcore 5th-place Italian Grand Prix grid penalty as Williams submits a right of review following Carlos Sainz's controversial Zandvoort penalty on media day at Monza. From Racing News 365, my name is Nick Golding, and I'm delighted to be joined, as always, by lead editor Ian Parks, who is at the Temple of Speed, I'm very pleased to say. And Ian, it has been a pretty good media day, it's got to be said, and we've got to begin with the man of, well, the day, probably going into the weekend, Lewis Hamilton, his first Monza trip as a Ferrari driver, a big moment for him. He got a small taste of what it's going to be like this weekend at an event in Milan on Wednesday. There was thousands of fans in attendance, but of course he does have this 5th-place grid penalty for an incident which happened before the Dutch Grand Prix, but then was penalised a couple of hours after it. And interestingly, Lewis didn't find out about the penalty until he had landed after flying away from Zandvoort.
Bizarre. I mean, it just goes to show, Nick, just how long these decisions can take sometimes. Obviously, the bone of contention with around that penalty in particular was that Lewis's incident occurred pre-race. The penalty didn't happen, as you say, until 2 hours post-race. Why such a major delay? Because if the FIA stewards had acted there and then and penalised Lewis, he would have had a 10-second stop and go, just to add a little bit of clarity on that. But in this case, I've been informed by the FIA that with the data that they'd received from Ferrari, there was a little bit of a discrepancy in the telemetry. So this is why on this occasion, they decided to delay post-race so they could sit down with the team representative and of course Lewis to go through that telemetry data and work out exactly what the discrepancies were. Now, if you recall very quickly, just to sum up, Lewis at A, gone through too quickly through a double waved yellow section, and B, coming out of that double wave yellow section, had entered the pit lane too quickly. The FIA determined that Lewis, yes, he did back off, but not sufficiently enough in their eyes. Hence that 5-place grid penalty that could only have been applied for this particular race, because quite naturally the Zandvoort race had been and gone, and anyway Lewis had crashed out in it, of course.
And hardcore was the word he used to describe it. And penalties were, of course, a big theme of the Dutch Grand Prix last weekend. And sticking with penalties, and Carlos Sainz was equally frustrated at his 10-second time penalty for being judged at fault for causing a collision with Liam Lawson. It's a story which has rumbled on throughout the week, and particularly going into media day today. Carlos Sainz confirmed on media day in the second press conference, which also featured Lewis Hamilton, that he did indeed speak to the FIA following the incident in Zandvoort last Sunday. But since then, and since the media days kind of concluded, Williams has submitted a right of review. It does feel that this is a very big incident, that they want to know clarification on exactly why Carlos was penalised, because actually you speak to other drivers as well, including Alex Albon, okay, yes, Sainz's teammate, but he pointed out, being the driver behind the incident, that he thought it was either a racing incident or a penalty for Liam. It's a delicate topic, this one.
Yeah, as you say, Nick, quite right. It has been a bone of contention ever since that incident took place on Sunday. And basically, all the stewards could really do was go on the specific regulation. And that is why they had to give Carlos that 10-second penalty. That specific regulation, of course, refers to the fact that the front axle of Carlos Sainz's Williams was not in a particular position going around that right-hand loop at Zandvoort, that turn one right-hand loop at the apex. It was not in a particular position with regard to the front axle of Liam Lawson's racing balls. So therefore, via the letter of the law, they had to apply this 10-second penalty, which of course Carlos fumed at over the radio initially. And then, yes, whilst he managed to keep his emotions in check, as he talks about it post-race, you could quite clearly tell he was not a happy bunny. So now what's the situation? As you say, Williams has decided to launch this right of review. A right of review is basically a team's given process when they feel they've been unjustly hard done by a particular penalty. So what Williams now has to do is provide the FIA stewards in attendance that were in attendance at Zandvoort with significant and relevant new evidence that was not available at the time the hearing took place, or at the time the stewards made their decision anyway, with regards to that penalty. If there is significant and relevant new evidence submitted within that hearing, the FIA stewards agree with it, then it will then go on to a second hearing to determine the actual merits of the case involved and whether they feel the penalty was just at the time, or whether they feel actually we can change the penalty. Now, of course, the 10-second time penalty was served in race. Nothing can be done about that now. That's been and gone. But of course, Carlos had 2 penalty points applied to his super license. So if Williams were to win this case, then those 2 penalty points would come off.
And of course, keep an eye on Racing News 365 for all the developments on this story, because it's going to be going on for a little while, I think. Speaking of Racing News 365, over on our Instagram channel, racingnews365.com, we are still running a prize giveaway. If you'd like to win a replica Ayrton Senna helmet, all the information on how to be in the chance of winning is in a tagged post over on our Instagram account. The competition will conclude on Sunday, so hurry up and get your ways of winning in. Best of luck to all of you who enter. Ian, moving on, and you said the word processes that Williams are going through. A driver going through processes is Lando Norris, coming to terms with the fact that he is now 34 points adrift of Oscar Piastri following the retirement, the unfortunate retirement, given it was outside of his control in Zandvoort on Sunday. And he's now had a few days to really reflect on what happened, speak to the team about it, and it's fair to say Lando knows that he's got to do everything and more now to get back into this title fight realistically, because he realizes now that if he doesn't win it and it comes down to the fact that he retired in Zandvoort, he'll have no choice but to take it on the chin.
The problem here, though, Nick, is that Lando already feels he is doing as much as he possibly can, and he stated that quite clearly today within his press conference that took place on Thursday here in Media Day at Monza. It was one of those things. It was out of his control, as you say. There was nothing he can do now. Yeah, Lando was in quite a philosophical mood when he spoke with the media on Thursday, in all fairness. And basically, Nick, he says he's doing all he can anyway. What occurred at Zandvoort was just one of those, for McLaren at least, once in a blue moon kind of things. Lando referred to the fact that this was a mechanical retirement that they'd not had for what he said was a record 60 races at McLaren. This was the longest they had gone in the team's history without such a failure occurring. Now, whether that's absolutely correct, we'd have to defer to our stat guru, Jake Nicol, to look that one up for us and work out if Lando's actually got that one nailed. But nevertheless, as I say, he feels he's doing everything he possibly can with regard to practice sessions, qualifying, races, etc. And so, as I say, he was quite philosophical about matters. I asked him specifically, as it got to the point now where, whilst he would not want to wish anything ill towards Oscar, has it got to the point where, ideally now, for him to win the title, it really needs something to happen to Oscar? And he kind of moved away from that. He didn't want to say, look, I've no need to wish Oscar any ill will. Quite naturally, if he wins the title, it means he will have done the best over the course of the season. What he did notably point out is the fact that the biggest frustration and problem for him right now is the fact that McLaren is so dominant that there is no one else outside of Oscar and Lando that could come in and disrupt these 1-2s that they are continually having right now. As mentioned earlier in our videos this week, if Lando hadn't have retired on Sunday at Zandvoort, that would have been 5 successive 1-2s for McLaren. And the way things are going right now, it is hard to see beyond anything other than 1-2s continuing for McLaren over the rest of this season. So that's the difficulty that Lando faces, that he really does, although he's not going to say it, he really does need something to happen to Oscar to really propel him back into this thick of this title battle. Otherwise, as we've discussed from this particular point onwards, he would have to win the next 5 races, Oscar second, for him just to take the lead by one single point going into the final 4 races of this campaign.
But actually, you know, despite that fact, on the other side of the garage, in terms of the championship leader, Oscar Piastri, yes, he's got this 34-point lead, but as he said himself today, he's not going to feel comfortable now from this. No. He knows he's still got to do everything he can because he's got experience of seeing a lead almost wiped out down to the very end, as he recalled.
Yeah. In previous series, of course, that's the case. So he knows that he cannot afford to back off. He knows that he still has to give his absolutely everything, and he will not start feeling comfortable, as he pointed out, until that gap is now significantly bigger than it currently is. And of course, at that particular stage, when there are fewer races remaining. So as far as he's concerned, it's still going to be mano a mano. He's not going to give up. He's still going to push himself to the absolute limit to ensure, of course, he pushes Lando Norris to the absolute limit.
And just finally, of course, got to touch on Max Verstappen, who, if we cast our minds back to 12 months ago, gave us one of the most remarkable lines I think I've heard a driver say in a long time, called the RB20 a monster. Obviously, Monza was a really bad weekend for Red Bull last season. That point was put to him today on Media Day, and thankfully for Red Bull fans, we're pleased to hear he's feeling much more comfortable despite the recent results in the RB21 compared to how he felt, particularly in Monza in the RB20 last year.
I was stood in the pen this time last year when Max came out with those quotes describing his RB20 as, quote unquote, an undrivable monster. And it literally was the headline of the day. It was one of those where I remember sending the audio across to you guys and saying, get on this straight away. This is gold in terms of quotes from Max. But it was an undrivable monster, if you think about it, Nick, that still gave him his 4th success, or his 4th world title anyway. So, yes, he does feel that the RB21, while it has not thrust him into the throes of a title battle with Oscar and Lando this season, nevertheless, he has felt a lot more comfortable in it compared to the RB20. So he himself was actually feeling a little bit philosophical, a little bit like Lando Norris. It was a case of, yeah, you know, it is what it is in many respects. Bottom line is, I'm not winning races as I would like to be doing, but I have still won a couple. I am still 3rd in the Drivers' Championship. You know, you can't dismiss that. It's just that at Red Bull, we have obviously set ourselves such high standards, and quite obviously they have with those 4 successive Drivers' titles and 2 consecutive Constructors' titles, that naturally anything below that is always going to be seen effectively as failure. But Max does not see it that way. He still feels that, bottom line, he has a reasonable car. Yes, it's caused him problems at times, of course, this season. It's not really been to his liking. But nevertheless, this car, the RB21, right now, compared to how he felt in the RB20 exactly 12 months ago, he feels is actually a better car for the way he feels within it and the way he likes to drive it.
And the big question being, will he be able to threaten the McLarens this weekend? So those watching, let us know in the comment section below if you think anyone can take the fight to McLaren. We hope so. We want to see a good race at Monza. Ian, amazing stuff as always. For those watching, please do smash the like button, subscribe to the channel, and join Ian and I after practice 1 and 2 on Friday. See you later.
Thanks for watching and listening, folks. As always, take care.